Yeah, okay. Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to day two. My name's Amanda Lurie. I'm a first-year MBA student here at Sloan, and I am proud to present to you guys the Wearable panel presented by Zebra Technologies. On our panel today, we have Andrew Hawkins from the Cleveland Browns, Brian Kopp from Catapult Sports, Kirk Lacob from the Golden State Warriors, Eric Petrocinelli from Zebra Technologies, Brian Russell from Zephyr Technologies, owned by Medtronics, and our panel will be moderated by Mark McCluskey from Wired Magazine. And the panel will last for about 45 minutes, and then we'll have 15 minutes of questions at the end. If you'd like to submit a question, head over to our app and click the Q&A tab and submit it there. And with that, I'll hand it over to Mark.
Good morning, everyone. It's 9 a.m. How's everybody doing? Good? Fantastic? All right, awesome. I'm going to take 2 seconds and do slightly more elaborate introductions because I think it's important to know the perspectives that you're getting from this panel. And amazingly, my list is in the order that we're seated on stage, which is sort of statistically impossible here. But so he's been a Bishop McCord High School Crimson Crusher. He's been a Toledo Rocket, a Montreal Alouette, won a couple of Grey Cups. Been a Bengal. Now he plays for my favorite NFL team, the Cleveland Browns. He caught 63 passes for last year. Andrew Hawkins is here, so let's welcome Andrew. If you've been to Sloan, you've seen Brian Kopp talk about stats. Previously at Stats Inc., where he worked on the SportView project. Now he is the president of North America for Catapult Sports. So Brian Kopp.
Here. Not as many touches.
Kirk Lacob is going to help me get tickets to playoff games. Right? No, probably not. He's the assistant GM of my favorite NBA team, Golden State Warriors, Kirk Lacob. Eric Petrocinelli is an Air Force vet. He's an electrical engineer. He's a longtime sports marketer, worked for the NFL, and now the GM of sports technology for sports for Zebra Technologies, which has worked extensively with the NFL with their RFID tracking solution. So, Eric, thank you for being here. And Brian Russell is the CEO and founder of Zephyr Technologies. Medtronic purchased them last year. They specialize in remote physiological monitoring, worked with special forces and athletes and really cool technology. So Brian Russell. Me, I'm a guy who writes about sports and tech, and you don't really care what I think. So let's ask these guys. I want to understand the state of the art of wearable technology when it comes to professional athletes today, and I want to ask Eric and the two Brians to talk about sort of the technologies that your companies are working on and offering, and where they are in the marketplace. So let's start nearest me, and we'll work this way.
Okay. So I think where we are is the sensors are very wearable and low hassle for the players. The software is very easy to use by the coaches now. So it's really about putting some of the systems together, and I think the entire industry, whether it's healthcare or sports, analytics is now the next frontier, because that's going to make all of this data more useful, give you quicker decisions and more insight. And all of this data is only valuable when it either entertains somebody or you take an action and change how you're going to train somebody. And the overall goal at the moment is still fitness and injury-free for the players and entertainment on the TV side.
Okay. Eric, how about from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we do at Zebra is we differentiate, the player tracking business from the consumer wearables business. I mean, our philosophy is that the wearables business, over the long term is going to be dominated by the Under Armours, the Nikes, the Adidases of the world, the Apples, Googles, et cetera, as they come out with applications that are then mass marketed. We really are a player tracking solution, and as Zebra Technologies, which is really a multinational, multi-billion-dollar company, we're in the businesses, and really our mission is about making business leaders as smart, as connected as the world they live in, and we really do that through what we call enterprise asset intelligence, and really that manifests itself in our solution in player tracking, where the application is a consumer application as well as a professional application. You'll talk a little bit more about that later.
Okay. And Brian, how about from
I think from a broad standpoint, people think wearables, you think your Fitbits or what you wear in your wrist, and that's a lot of what's getting attention these days. I mean, at Catapult, we've been doing this for over 8 years, working with elite athletes, and we know that elite athletes are very different than normal people in terms of what you track and how you want to look at their performance. So the technology itself has advanced quite a bit. I mean, I agree with both Brian and Eric. It's not as much about the hardware as about the data, what you do with it, the analytics. And for us, we work very closely with our partners and our teams to help make sure that they're getting what they need out of it. But the technology will continue to advance, get smaller, get more accurate, collect more data. But it really doesn't matter unless you're providing a solution that the teams can use, that you're showing value. Everyone's going to have a brand new widget that comes along that looks pretty interesting, but unless you can actually show value to your clients, it won't stick around. So for us, we've been doing it for a while, and we keep pushing that up the chain because we have a lot of global clients, and what we see here in the US is we're still relatively early in the adoption of sports science, and we see a lot of potential for that to grow.
Let me ask about that from the adoption side. Kirk, maybe you can give us an overview of sort of where you guys are as a franchise and sort of adopting some of these sports science perspectives and how that connects into player tracking.
Well, it's kind of funny that I'm up here with these three guys because we've used all three companies at some point. We currently at the Golden State level are using Catapult. We've used Zephyr before, and we're trying Zebra out in the D League with our minor league team in Santa Cruz. So we're obviously trying to find out what works best because it's all about the players and maximizing their careers and what they can do for us on the court. So I think we have a long way to go, but all three of these companies are doing a great job. And we just have to, I guess, learn what works and what doesn't work.
And Andrew, from the player's perspective, what do you feel like you get from these tools? What insights do you glean from the information?
Well, I guess we just started using the wearable tech this year, so it's still kind of in the process of us being able to find a way to apply the data. But one example is we had a player who had a history of hamstring injuries, and this year he was on basically a pitch count. So once his workload that was calculated by the technology hit a certain level, they were able to shut him down. He didn't have any hamstring issues for the rest of the season. And like I said, he's had the last 3 years, his seasons have been derailed by hamstring. So injury prevention, being able to sustain players over a 16-game season, I mean, the possibilities are endless. And like I said, I think that's just the starting point, and it'll go a lot further from there.
I'd love to hear people's perspectives on, you mentioned, Brian, that we're sort of at an early stage of adoption in the US as compared to other countries, especially. I'd love to drill into that a little bit more and talk about sort of how this sort of technology and data might be used differently in different countries around the world and what might account for our sort of lagging behind a little bit. I don't know if anybody wants to start.
Yeah, I mean, I think Catapult was founded in Australia, and they've used this technology for a number of years, both in games and practice, and in Aussie rules football where they don't have pads, so it's not an issue for the players to use it. And really it's because they want to improve what they're doing. So the players and the teams are looking at it as a way, these are elite athletes, they want to avoid guys keep being out for hamstrings, they want to avoid things that will put them in a position to be more prone to injury. What's interesting, once you have longitudinal data, you can look at situations that you get more prone to injury, and the league itself in Australia is looking at ways to avoid those situations. So if there are, when you look at those injuries, you look at when they occur, not only in practice, but in games, you can start to look at areas that you can start to avoid to make sure that guys aren't hurt. And it helps the teams, it helps the athletes, and quite honestly, from a league and team standpoint, they want to make sure their players, their best players are out on the field, doing what they're paid to do, maximizing their performance. So it's really been part of the DNA of sports in Australia. It's been around in Europe. It's really early days here in the U.S. And I think that's a good thing because there's immediate examples like the one Andrew gave that show you here's a starting point. That's not all it can do, but it's a very small starting point that you can build off of. And over time, you start to build that longitudinal data. You start to really be able to maximize guys. It's very similar to using data in game analysis. It's just in a different way, and I think much deeper because it has a bigger impact. But it is, I'd say, on that adoption curve, we're still very, very early, which is exciting because I think there's a lot of potential still going in the future.
as athletes, they always tell us, we need to be in tune with our body. And, I've always considered myself a guy that's, good at knowing when to shut it down. Like, as you can see by my feet barely touching the floor, I'm not the tallest guy. So I am a try-hard guy. So I've kind of based my career off of being able to go, balls to the wall to the end. Well, with the wearable tech, being in tune with your body is now in a data form. So they can say, hey, you don't have any more in the tank, and, maybe going as hard as you can for 4 days before the, straight, then going to the game might not necessarily be giving you the best output on Sundays.
And do you find that data is matching up with what you feel, or are you sometimes seeing a mismatch between sort of what you feel and what the data might be showing you?
Well, yeah, I can remember. So, I switched over from the Bengals to the Browns, and I came to the Browns in the spring of last year, and they do things differently, meaning like we had a new coach and practices were a lot harder, right? So I remember thinking, man, I'm getting pounded at practice. I feel like I am dead tired. Maybe it's all in my head. Well, then the wearable tech came along about 2 months into it, and basically it confirmed everything that I was feeling. Like, yes, I am getting pounded. So my workload was, a lot higher than a lot of other players in my position, and and from that they scaled me back through the spring and into the season, and I think it helped sustain me over a 16-game season.
And organizationally, and Kirk, maybe you can speak to this a little bit. How do you manage that? I think there's sometimes this bravado in athletes that they don't want to hear that they're doing too much, and sometimes throttling an athlete back can be a difficult conversation to even have because there's some question in their mind of like, well, are they really happy about this, or are they just, so how do you manage that with the player in those situations?
Well, we have these guys who are really highly paid called coaches and trainers as well, and this is really their job, is to manage the players and their careers. We obviously, look at the data with them, but we really trust these people. These are guys we've put a lot of work into hiring, and they're around the team a lot more than we are. As front office execs, we're not there necessarily every day. So we look at more of, I would say, long-term effects. But in terms of day-to-day and managing these guys, it's really important. The NBA is a long season. It's really, really long. And I think it's really, we're in the middle of a stretch right now, 4 games and 5 nights. I think it's actually even 5 and 7. And, that's the type part during the year. We're after the All-Star break where we've got to make sure these guys are right. And our training staff and our coaches, they're really in tune. They talk to these guys every single day. They talk to each other every single day. They look at the data. And yeah, if they're not, I guess I have to put the onus on them a little bit, because if they're not prepared like they said they would, then we can have an issue with a player later on. That'd be really bad. But we're still in the infancy stage. We're learning a lot about how players' bodies work from a data standpoint.
And I think to add to that, one of the things that's interesting about these type of technologies versus other data or other tools is you're touching every part of the organization, starting with the athlete who has to put something on and understand what it is and understand how the data is used, to the training staff, to the rehab guys, all the way up to the head coach. Because if you're going to tell a coach, hey, we got to change practice, we got to dial this guy back, you got to tell him why, right? He's not just going to be like, oh, okay, that guy's tired. No, you got to show him information. You got to tell him this is why, it's what I'm basing it on. And I can assume that's not an easy conversation, because these coaches want to push guys, they want to motivate guys, and you're trying to find that balance between motivation versus pushing them to the brink. And I'm sure that's a really hard struggle. And now you're entering new data into the mix. So it's an interesting dynamic where every part of the organization is getting involved. And I think that's a positive thing, but again, it's part of the evolution of using this kind of information. And unlike other things, it goes all the way down to the athlete. Because you could do stats and things and the athlete doesn't know. When you're putting something on, I'm sure a lot of these guys want to know, what is this? How is it being used? Is it using against me? And if you can show those positive things, then it allows you to see this is the value I'm getting out of it. And I also like the story you told me yesterday about the competition. Who's got the highest speed? Yeah. And you told me you did.
Yeah, well, it was like you said, at first we didn't really understand what it was. And, in football, guys are so used to their particular process on a daily basis that even something as little as, hey, put this shirt on, was an issue. Like, I don't want to wear that shirt. I always wear this shirt. So once we got past that, and, our strength coach, Paul Ritchie, did a great job kind of explaining, what the benefits were to it. And we kind of got into it, the metrics a little bit, just miles per hour. So as a receiving group, every day we'd check who had the highest miles per hour for the day, like who got the fastest speed, to where guys are literally taking their chip out and throwing it across the field. Oh, I got 42 miles per hour. Like, no, you didn't. But it just plays to the competitive nature, and like I said, I think it benefited us.
Wait, they could only throw the chip 42 miles an hour?
Yeah. Well, they tried to do it realistic, and they still overshot it.
You want to split
Yeah, you got to make it look
right?
believable.
If I throw an 80, that's clear that.
I think it's important to note that this technology is not just for restricting or backing people off. Like Ryan Capretta did some awesome work pre-combine this year, identifying that some of his slower 40-yard dash times were due to the guys coasting through that second step. So as soon as he saw that and saw why, then by sharing the video and acceleration data with the player, it gave them a language to discuss what was happening and how to fix it. And that's career defining. You've now got faster guys going to the combine. So there is absolute performance and financial benefit for everybody as well. And I think what the guys are saying is this technology is giving a language to everybody in the organization. It may be load or intensity to the head coach. You don't want to talk VO2 max and anaerobic threshold to the head coach, but it is giving them a simplified view. And I think the exciting piece is the analytics. Is the analytics result is a simplified number. So is it how much is in the tank, or what your physiological load is, or your mechanical load? And so you can have a head coach say, hey, it was a hard mechanical game yesterday, let's have a light mechanical training today.
Right.
Give them a 3. And so he's now got a language. He doesn't have to go down to the detail that maybe his strength and conditioning coach would, and he'd be intimidated having that conversation without the data and the things to talk about.
I think that's a thing that in the years I've been coming here, you hear a lot, is bridging that gap between turning data into information in some ways, right? Taking raw data and making it actionable, making it something that decision makers in an organization can handle. And so it sounds like that you think that that's a big...
I think it's huge, and it's about communication, it's about a narrative, whether it's on TV or the coach trying to make a decision, it's what's the narrative of that player and how does the data add to that narrative, because there's a whole lot of other stuff that's taking place as well, so it's a piece. But we find it's closing the loop. You're now measuring the person and informing some of the decisions as opposed to having very simple blocks, like the Pittsburgh Pirate, pitchers, for example, may just pitch 120 and stop because that's been shown to stop them wearing out. Well, if you can actually measure their load, somebody might be able to pitch 150, but somebody may have to pitch at 100 and stop. So again, the coaches are getting quite excited that they can stop just having these very simple rules that have given results, and now they can individualize the rules per player and get the most out of the team.
Right.
Can I add to that really quick? Because he made a good point. Something he said, to me, communication is probably like 70% of the battle. The data itself is like 30%, but if you can't effectively communicate that information, it's pretty much worthless to you. And that's not just, bio data, that's every kind of analytical method, but he made a great point. He said his coach, I think you said your strength coach, right, was the guy who made it. He explained it to you guys in a way that it made sense. That's really key, because if guys don't understand, and not just the players, but the coaches too, if they don't understand why you have something or what it means, it's essentially worthless. And then we've spent all this money, given these guys all this money to play with, and we're not getting anything out of it.
But we also have to realize too, when, all the experience we've had at the clubs, at the league level, and initiatives that we're working on, is the data is a tool. It's not replacing decision making. In many cases, it's really just confirming their intuition. They, a lot of times, if you speak to a lot of these coaches, they can see it. Even somebody running, where they'll get, a calculation and, it'll be a certain speed. You'll be surprised. These coaches are pretty accurate just with their own eyes. So a lot of times it's, providing complementary information that can a lot of times reinforce decisions that they're already making, or if there is some level of doubt, they can, decide what information is going to be applicable to them as they make that.
I think that's the false dichotomy that we've set up over the past decade of this narrative of sort of quants versus subjective, right? I think the best organizations are finding ways to blend those, to have quantitative information confirm or question the subjective evaluation of things and move forward from that.
But it's no different in business.
Right.
Like you're getting all information in business, whether it's research related, market related, and you're ingesting all that information and you're making the best decisions you can in business. And that's what's happening down on the coaching level.
So let me ask you more about that because Zebra comes at this from very much a business infrastructure, like shipping containers and things like that. I think that's an interesting perspective, that businesses have been used to having all of this quantitative information and not relying so much on gut necessarily, and that maybe that's part of what's actually happened in sports over this sort of data revolution.
Yeah, I mean, so for Zebra, what we're doing really is we're looking and trying to provide visibility for decision makers so that they can make better, smarter, faster decisions, just like we've done in a lot of industries, whether it's industrial, retail, healthcare, or travel and entertainment. Our approach has been, with the NFL, is really at the league level and then down to the clubs, because we ourselves feel the most important day of the week is game day. Like, that is ultimately the metric by which everybody is being measured. You either win or lose, you either perform or you don't perform on game day. And so for us, everything starts with game day, from a GM standpoint, from a coach standpoint, from an individual trainer standpoint. And then what you want to do is you want to tie game day to the rest of the week. But game day is the critical part, because if you don't have the link to game day, in our opinion, then you have a really faulty system, because you're missing the most important day of the week. But also from a business standpoint that you raised, I mean, we approach the business, there's the professional side, which is what we're talking about, but there's a vast consumer side of the business that you heard the NFL talk about yesterday, which is really all about fan engagement. I mean, it was interesting, if you heard the commissioner's press conference in Arizona, he started off his State of the Union, and really at the initial part, he said this offseason is going to be focused on innovation and technology. And really, he said that innovation and technology is going to be about player safety, it's going to be about the game, excuse me, and it's going to be about the ability to bring an enhanced experience to the fan. And basically what he's talking about is the Zebra player tracking system, and basically enabling data to go out to both the consumer as well as the professional side of the business.
So that fan experience, over the course of our lives as fans, like we've gone from me growing up and thinking that like hitting 300 was really great, and then having a different understanding of like what OBP might look like, or OPS, and now you see those on games, like, I don't know what a good miles per hour for a wide receiver is. So when I see this... 22? There you go. So
that's what it looks like.
Sounds awfully fast, right? So I mean, it's interesting that as you start to capture this data and expose it to fans, part of what you have to do is contextualize it. Like, exactly. What is fast? What is a lot of load? And so are you guys as providers thinking about how you offer those?
I think it's an absolute must. So for the Combine several years ago, we came up with some quite simplistic ones, such as explosiveness off the 40-yard dash, or jump height and so forth. The entire industry, including the commentators that are trying to make it part of an exciting story, are still learning what data they're allowed to use. You've got privacy issues and so forth as well, and then how to make it an interesting part of the story and put it in. So I think what Zebra brings with speed and location, it's a very obvious transition. I think physiology, load, how much is left in the tank, is a more complex story to give to people. But the result is my favorite player is still playing this season or next season. So the results may be good. I think the physiology is slightly behind the more apparent speed, distance. G's is exciting, that's cool. I can give an equivalent G under some exciting example and go, and that's what he just got. So right. I think it's more, what can the audience understand is right. Very important.
And we're working with the broadcast partners, in the off season to what I would call dimensionalize the data. Because at the end of the day, like for an NFL broadcast, or for that matter, an NBA broadcast, I mean, a lot of the game's being explained through the color commentators. And so they have to, basically understand the data, get the quick points in, and basically expose it to the fans. And I think as those metrics are explained and as they're contextualized into the sport, to the fan by the color commentators, I think then you start seeing broad scale adoption.
Let me ask about some flip sides. We've talked a lot about benefits to the athlete and longevity of their career and protecting that player that an organization has invested money in. There's definitely been some talk from players in various sports about, well, wait, what happens at contract time when you have this data and you see my performance has waned? And so Andrew, I'm curious to hear your perspective, and then maybe I'll put Kirk on the spot to talk a little bit more from the franchise perspective on how.
Well, I think there's two sides of it. I think, like you said, I think you have to have a balance between, the data and still having that coach's touch to be it, because you can't measure, heart and desire with the metrics from the wearable tech, but there'll be a life cycle. So, when you're starting out, it's going to make you a better player, and that's fact, because we'll be able to tell you, hey, you do this, lower your workload and better output on Sundays. But after 5 years, and you have 5 years of data, it's like, hey man, you're getting slower on a daily basis. So now when they, if you get released, and I mean that's professional sports. It's just able to put everything. It's going to be less of a conversation like when you're watching Hard Knocks, and they cut him and it's going to slide the paper over. He's going to read it. He's going to get up and walk out.
It's like,
you know what I mean? And that's,
thank you very much, Coach.
Really
enjoyed my time
case,
here.
But
Yeah.
this is pretty telling.
And is that so? It's a weird question. How do you feel about that? That
sucks.
Yeah.
Like I said, I think as someone, you just understand the business, and whether we like it or not, I mean, it's gonna get to that point. It's kind of like, football in itself. The philosophy is they much rather use a rabbit's foot than use actual data from wearable tech to win a football game. You know what I mean? And I think it's just a matter of time before it gets there. Like like they spoke on it yesterday about the 40-yard dash. I mean, the only reason they run the 40-yard dash is because we have X amount of years to go back to base it off of. Well, now that we have, the technology, you can measure explosion, you can measure, directional. He goes best right to left, and all these things, and they'll break it down. And once we get the baseline, they'll be able to draw back to it and make better decisions about who will be good receivers. Because obviously the 40-yard dash, that's probably not the best metric.
But like any data, you can use it both ways, right? So earlier you talked about the guy who always had hamstring injuries, and we were able to avoid that. That's going to prolong his career.
Yeah.
So there's going to be ways, like any data, that you could use it against a player and say you're losing a step. But hopefully what happened is your career was extended by 2-3 years before you start losing that step. So it is all to the organization, how they use it, how they put it into the practice of what they do with their athletes. And really, working with guys like Paul Ritchie, he doesn't want to catch you. He doesn't want to cut you. He wants to maximize what you do. And it's those guys that are going to build careers in the sports that they play. And so it's all like any data, you can use it both ways. I do think it's a big issue is how are you going to figure out what the front office can use, what the athletes have access to, because it's something that's still being worked out. But hopefully both sides can see the benefits, and hopefully both sides can see how it can help both make decisions in the front office and make prolong the careers and make sure guys are out there on the field. Because that's what they're looking to do. They're not looking to get rid of guys. They're looking to make sure they're out there.
Like I said, I think there's going to be a balance. You know what I mean? But it's going to be a part of the game. I mean, because you take someone like Anquan Bolden, who I think coming out of college, he ran like a 4.85 in the 40 when he was 21 years old. So now at 34, you can imagine what his 40 time or what his data would be. But he's, like I said, you can't measure heart. You can't measure how good of a football player he is. So you have to be able to use the data not only for yourself, for your players, and be able to know, okay, he might not be the most explosive guy, but he's, a damn good football player.
But I think also we have to realize when it gets down to like player personnel decisions, I mean, we're dealing with leagues that are, operating under salary caps. So there's, the pot of money is going to the players. It's just that they're going to optimize it potentially differently. Some money's going to go to one player versus another. It's not like any less money's going to go to a player. And what ends up happening to me is they're already making decisions. I mean, today, we're just giving more information. I mean, they already know who's slowing down and who's not slowing down. A lot of times based on, decisions, they're looking for, the fit of a person, beyond the whole physical, aspects of it, the fit of a person to a team. Are they going to work together? Is it going to be a cohesive locker room, or as we were talking before, a divided locker room? So, I mean, there's a lot of factors that go in it. We shouldn't always look at the data as being, in my opinion, negative. I think it's informative. It's one piece of data that goes into a much larger equation when they're evaluating personnel. And I think there's a lot of benefit to a player in, that it can give them sightlines to prolonging their career.
I think the thing that gets missed a lot is just because we have all this data, there's not a magical answer that comes out from it. So if you individualize every player in every position, what top 2 or 3 factors actually make them a better player? That player may learn something about themselves based on calories, or we've got some players we work with on a hot day, they eat slightly more. They've learned that makes them perform better on a hotter day. Maybe the coach doesn't use that data, they use a different piece of data. So there's a lot of manual data that already exists. This is more data, it's new, but I think the human creativity and the competitiveness is how to use it, which bits you use and which bits you ignore. And that prioritization of what data points you're getting, I think that's where the fun is going to be, because I think every player and every team is going to choose different bits to focus on. And that's now going to be the new competitiveness. I don't think we're going to make every team vanilla and every player vanilla. It's just a richer conversation.
I mean, we see that already. We just in various teams' orientations towards this tool set, right? You have some that are very enthusiastic and some that are less enthusiastic and approach it differently.
Yeah.
Kirk, when you look from sort of the organizational perspective, I just want to tie off the sort of player issues. I think part of what has happened in American sports over a couple of decades is sort of an adversarial relationship between labor and management, and I think that's part of what informs this conversation. Do you see that morphing and changing? Do you see this being part of CBA negotiations?
Well, I absolutely think that anything we put on a guy's body is going to be part of a negotiation. I think the tough thing when we look at data and how it relates to, you described Andrew did the hard part of sitting across and the guy telling you if you're good enough or not. The hard part for us is most of this data looks back. And as management, we're trying to look forward. The hardest thing to do is project. And it's totally an inexact science. So the best thing we can do is try to collect a lot of data over a period of time, many different cases, and try to build some sort of predictive model, however that is. Because in reality, and this is unfortunate, you often pay guys for past performance. And every sport's a little bit different, right? In baseball, you got to go through 6 years of making, well, what in baseball terms is peanuts. And then, you're like 31 years old, your career is about to start going down, and all of a sudden you get paid $200 million. Probably not going to get your $200 million worth of value from the 31-year-old guy. Maybe if he does a lot of steroids, you might. And maybe that's part of your model. But, in basketball, we have a rookie scale, and then we've got to project if a guy's going to get better or not. And it's very easy to look at what a guy's done in the past and hope that he's going to continue to do that, when in reality, the truth is you're probably not going to get that contract value. You're going to have to pay for that past. So our goal is to try to find out which guys, if we sign them preemptively, maybe give them more money than they're worth based on past results, what is it about those guys that's going to help them continue to get better and be worth a future contract? And a lot of that could be, how's their body going to survive this beating that they take? Is this somebody whose athleticism is going to increase over the next few years? Those are the questions we have to ask. And it's, like I said, it's totally an exact science. But the more data we have, the more informed decision we can make and a better bet we can make.
So right now in North American pro sports, real-time data from these technologies are not available to decision makers on the field. And I want to talk about what that starts to look like in the future when you do have this data on the field. And Brian, you mentioned Aussie Rules football. That's a case where that data is available on the field. And so maybe we can talk about that, and then I want to hear from everyone on sort of what that future vision maybe looks like when you start to get that information.
Yeah, I would say that the technology is available to be delivered real time. I think it's all about not only should it be allowed, but how can it be used? Just because it's there doesn't mean it's going to help you in that game decision. what they do in Australia, it's available live. They have a dynamic substitution in that game. And so they actually make substitutions later in the game based on what they're seeing in the data, who's getting tired, who's getting worn out, who's had a lot of collisions in the game, and they make those decisions live. Now, it took some time to understand what the metrics were, compare it to what's going on with practice. As Eric said earlier, fit in the rest of the week into what happens in the game. You know, it's all part of the big picture, but the technology is available to be delivered live. We work with a lot of college football teams, and some of them, the conferences are starting to experiment and allow it being viewed live, so we have a few teams that we're looking at it live. Now again, right now they're looking at it. They're not making decisions because there's a lot that goes on in a football game. It's very hectic. You know, there's guys that are making decisions on the fly. You're not going to sit, you don't have time to sit back and make your next chess move, especially the way a lot of teams play now. It's fast. But if you can start to look at things and see when a guy might be breaking down. So again, not just in practice, but if a guy's going really hard and you want to make it, and it's not about get him out, it's sit him for an extra play or two. Yeah. But that's going to take some time. So the technology's there. I think that the delivery methods are there. I think it's just a matter of how the coaches are going to get access to it and use it. You know, a sport like basketball, they don't really use much data during the game. It's really hard to do, maybe at halftime, you know, things like that. But so it's really a matter of fitting into the flow of the game. And, you know, it'd be interesting to see once we get to that point how it's being used, because it is happening around the world, but it's very situational and how that makes sense. You know, I think a sport like football, you could definitely see maybe coming over and saying, hey, you're going to sit you out on this third down or something. I'm sure you won't like hearing that. But.
No, well, it depends. But yeah, no, I agree. I think eventually it's just going to get to the point where, just like you have a special teams coordinator, you know, offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, you're going to have a data and analytics coordinator on the sideline for the, you know, the real-time info, being able to tell you, like, you know, I mean, coaches are at their best when they can control as much of the environment as possible. So if you know that, you know, late in the game that, you know, receiver X is tired, and, you know, it might be better to go with receiver B at this time, or your defensive back just covered a go route for 70 yards and he's lining back up against a fresh wide receiver, you probably don't want him in against that, you know, fast guy. So you can pull him out, put another DB in who's not tired, and, you know, and you could kind of make those decisions based on that. Essentially, it's like you're playing PlayStation, being able to check, you know, a player's stamina, speed, and, like I said, the more control, the better.
Well, I think one interesting part in football is not as much as skill players, to be honest, it's more the linemen. You think about offensive line for teams like Philadelphia. You know, they're fast the way they're playing, and teams are playing faster and faster. These guys have to pass block. You know, we kind of joke and say it's like a, you know, hand fight in a phone booth. You know, you're fighting these guys really hard. You have a lot of movements that you can capture, and then once you're done, you got to sprint 30 yards and do it all over again. Yeah. And those 5 guys, they don't get subbed out. You don't throw in a new tackle. You know, they're playing the whole game. So how you measure that is really important, how that translates into what you're doing within the game and how you can make sure they're prepared for it, but make those decisions in real time. I mean, it's going there, but I think the big key is how you're going to use it, and that's going to be case by case.
Yeah, I would say that, so we did it in the NFL. It wasn't distributed to teams because the league kept it centrally, but the data is all available real time, and as soon as it's rolled out to the 31 stadiums next year, that application will exist. I mean, their vision is to ultimately, you know, have the game information real time sent to the tablets on the sidelines. I mean, we focus on the players, but to me, the broader application is really with the coaches. And that's really from a schematics and tactics standpoint. For instance, we run a dashboard during games in real time. And basically, you know, we were showing somebody, you know, during a game that you could have seen, I'm not going to name who the player was, but it was a team playing, and basically what it showed was in the third quarter, this individual was a wide receiver. He had lined up 15 times on the left side and 3 times on the right side, and every time he lined up on the right side, it was a run. Now, if you, from a coaching standpoint, if you knew that information, and we've had this discussion with coaches, the defensive coach, they want that information as soon as possible. The offensive coach will tell you, I don't want him to have that because that's my advantage, like in the game. He can find out about it on Monday, but don't tell him about it today. So I think, like, oftentimes we focus on, you know, the athlete, and that's a critical part from a performance standpoint. But there's this a very big application from a coaching standpoint, from a schematics and tactics standpoint, in, you know, the NFL, and it will be in college football.
I mean, there's obviously that huge tactical and schematic application. I'm curious what you guys, you know, if the technology exists, you know, I worked at Wired, right? So my orientation is like, more technology is always better. Like, that's awesome. So,
Right.
I'm curious, what is potentially slowing or blocking that adoption of the real time?
They just, well, the only adoption is they just want competitive equality across the team. So in the case of the NFL, all the stadiums will be fully deployed next year. They'll test out the technologies on the feed to the tablets, and when they're comfortable, they'll start from a competition committee standpoint, feeding that data how they deem. So it's coming. It's there. It's just a matter of, I mean, we've talked about it. It's just a management issue of, I want competitive equality, and then I'll just decide what information gets passed and when.
I think there's also a safety piece, and I think the deal with Zebra has really pushed that forward. Putting any extra piece of equipment, particularly a hard battery-powered piece of electronics on somebody that can get blunt force trauma is a risk. And so that's where I think the Australians did a good job, so it's lucky it was the Australians that took the risk. And they did that first and proved it wasn't such a big deal, but they had to do it to prove that it wasn't going to cause extra damage. So player protection and risk has always been something that's limited it. The league's now said yes and shown it. So I think also whether it's the professional side like the people up here versus Fitbit, everything's getting smaller, and wearables are always too big. You always have to make your wearable smaller, more flexible, more washable, and so getting it to that, then putting it through an industrial washing machine so it's safe and the equipment guy can wash it and it still transmits back to the system, these things are still almost ready just to go pop.
So let's imagine we're back here, this same group, older and wiser, in 5 years having this conversation. What do you think we'd be talking about? What do you think we'd be most excited about in this space, and how it's changed and morphed over that 5-year horizon?
I think people will be debating what data they use to win. I think wearability, who's got it, access, data rights for players versus the league, it's all going to be history. It's going to be in the rear vision mirror. It's simply we won the Super Bowl because we did it this way. Two seasons ago, because they won't tell you what they're doing this season because that's their IP. So I think it's simply going to be why we won. I think all this other stuff will be, why did we wait so long?
Yeah, I think we'll be talking about just different applications like that can exist from a consumer standpoint or professionally, how somebody can, derive, different analytics to prove out different, points. I mean, I think it'll just be a data discussion and how you can use the data.
I think we'll be talking about the 5-time defending NBA champs and the 5-time Pro Bowl.
And a Browns Super Bowl.
You got some work to do.
Super Bowl MVP.
How data turned it all around.
No, I mean, I think like a lot of these panels, you go back and watch panels from 5 years ago at this conference, there was things that now are just part of how we think of the game. I think that, we're not going to be talking about the novelty of wearables, the newness of wearables. That's a lot of attention you get is there's something that exists, there's something that's being used. It's going to be part of the game, part of how it's used. It's really not going to be talked about as widely because of course we do that. Of course it's being used. What it's going to be talked about is how it's being used, how it's being improved, how the technology, not about the technology, it's about the data, it's about the athletes, it's about saying, hey, as Brian said, we won the Super Bowl, we won the NBA championship. That was part of the puzzle. It's not going to be why, but it's going to be part of the puzzle. And I think we're getting there at some stages, but there's still a lot of room to go.
Yeah, I think we'll be, like you said, just talking about how we're taking the next step to apply it and kind of innovating that, because I just think our generation of athlete, over the last couple of years, like they talked about, I think will be kind of known as the baseline athlete for the data. You know what I mean? Because they're kind of collecting all the information, and over time they'll be able to draw back to that. Much like I talked about with the 40-yard dash, we'll have a whole new set of numbers, and it'll be a lot more precise.
I think a really exciting future would be that technology as a performance enhancer has now got so wildly cool and good at what it's doing that now it's becoming an issue for people just like drugs are now. So if technology replaces drugs for performance enhancement, that would be a super awesome future for us to have to worry about. That's a good problem to have.
That's a good problem.
And we're starting to see that. Like the Olympic track team, we're seeing up to a 3% increase in speed for an 800 a meter runner. That's huge at that level. So we're seeing some very cool individual applications. I think the more mass media applications are a little bit slower. Like we work with Oracle. You've got Team Oracle, 72-foot catamaran doing 40 knots. The guys are 30 feet in the air. And they're all very individual sailors with individual jobs. Not only did they take the in-race loading to do the dry land training and individualize that, the boat designers used the data to change the way they design the boat. So I think there's some very cool sort of like applications outside of the mass media that learning is coming in. And then you've got these very cool people like Leslie Saxon on the medical side, Paul Robbins on the training side, that have been out there advocating this, and they're not only supplying value, but they're helping everybody understand how to do it. So I think there's this like group movement forward as an industry as everybody learns how to do it. More exciting, you'll have better plays, you'll have people playing longer, and it's just going to be more exciting for everybody.
Speaking of cool technology, I have this magical iPad that has your questions on it. So the first question, are these technologies affordable enough and user-friendly enough for high schools and colleges to benefit from? Or is it only for elite professional teams with their capabilities and their budgets?
I think the answer eventually will be yes. I mean, right now, a lot of the focus has been on the elite teams because that's where there are the most elite athletes. That's where you see the most benefit. Certainly, there's elements of what a NFL team is using that a high school team could use. I mean, if it's about trying to keep guys from getting hurt, maximizing their performance, make sure they don't. I mean, we talk about pitch counts for kids that are going up in Little League baseball, very similar to that. So that's definitely going to happen. I think it's a business model question, how you price things, how you position things, what you give them. I mean, you're not going to sell an NFL product to a high school team at the same price, so it's really about how you package it together. And then they're not going to have the strength and conditioning and training staff you do, so you got to make it easy for them to use, something to get out of it. But you see some interesting wearables popping up in the amateur leagues and youth markets, and I think that'll continue to happen. And I think that if you're able to tie it back to what goes on in elite athletes, one of the things I think is exciting is to be able to see the longitudinal growth of an athlete from amateur high school all the way up to the pros and start to compare, when you're in high school and playing, let's find the guys that have those characteristics that could become professional athletes. And it's not just 40-yard dash and very archaic ways of doing it. It's things that you can capture with technology that will really help to view that up. So I think it's going to happen. I think there's a lot of companies working on that. It's just a matter of, it's a very different market, not as many people, but I think there's definitely going to happen sooner rather than later.
I think the retail component is coming really quick. I mean, I guess 3 companies, but there's a company that I've worked with that I guess 2 of our owners and one of our former players, Jermaine O'Neal's invest in Athos, and it's a little bit different than what these guys do, but it's wearable compression, shorts and tops, and like that is a retail application that high school, even younger kids can wear, and all you literally have to do is put your pants on. And then you've got information. I've seen the beta. So like it comes out on an iPad, it tells you what muscles are firing. I think it uses ECG. So that's coming really quick, I think. And it's easy to start at the top level because that's what everybody's watching. That's how you make your mark. But I think all this is going to trickle down. The next question is going to be, how much is too much? We have that discussion every day about privacy. I mean, probably next time we do a panel, Andrew's going to be like, hey, yeah, you really can't put that chip in my head, okay? It's not happening. But those are the type of discussions we're going to start to have.
So at Zephyr, we go all the way down to consumer. We sell stuff on Amazon. The difference for the college space, like University of Maryland, we don't supply all the services, so it doesn't cost us as much to service them as a professional customer, but they can still get the product. But what we've had great success in is getting the bioengineering team and the mathematics classes and the engineering classes working with the cool guys, the sports clubs, the sports teams. And so now the professors are really excited because you've got some biomed kid working with the football team and they're doing the analysis. Well, they're free. That's his yearly project. So how you do it, the hardware's cheap enough, but it's the business and the service and everything you wrap around it that costs money, and it's a very different thing to deliver at the professional end. So I think the hardware's there myself. In a lot of cases, it's just.
And that's why I said, like for us at Zebra, we're really more in the enterprise solution business. We think that market, as you go lower, is just going to be dominated by like the Under Armours of the world, the Nikes of the world, the Adidas. I mean, there was an article even this morning about Under Armour, and what they're doing with their purchasing of like MapMyFitness and other entities to create like really a social media platform for training. And, I think like as you get down to, as Kirk said, the retail, they're going to come out with products that really are going to be, dimensionalizing down to those levels for the athletes.
Yeah. This is a good one. Is there some sort of data that you wouldn't tell an athlete?
Probably. Yeah. Yeah. They don't need to know everything. And there's a psychological component, too, to knowing things. I think, I'd love to.
Don't worry about it.
I mean, sometimes
everything is totally cool.
I mean, if you tell it, because not all your data is necessarily conclusive, too. So if you start telling a guy, we're seeing you're really starting to slow down out there. Andrew, in practice, you only ran 19 miles per hour max speed. I mean, he's going to start thinking about that, and not in a positive way, probably. Now, maybe he'll react really well, and he'll start working out even harder. But maybe he'll think about. I mean, I just think there's too much that we don't know to conclusively tell a guy something like that, because it will affect him. I mean, they are human beings.
Yeah. I mean, we know belief effects are incredibly powerful, right?
I will say athletes will have a problem with being. It's one thing to track all the data. It's another thing to not tell them what the results are. So, like, I'm just speaking from a personal standpoint. If I didn't have access to the data after a day, I might not even care. But even if I was like, hey, coach, let me see that data, and he said no, immediately I would never wear it. Just
there's a difference between commission and omission,
mind would
right?
just get the wheels would get turning.
But I mean, we've said it a couple times. It's all about communication, right? So you may want to see it after the fact. If he may not come and say, "I'm going to pull you out of a couple drills because of this data," they're just going to say, "Hey, go get a drink."
Yeah.
They're going to do it because you don't need all that stuff in your head. But you're right. I think it's important. I think you said Paul Ritchie and what you guys do at the Browns. It's great that he sits down and says, "Here's what you're doing. Here's how you're doing it," and then how you use it. Because I think when I hear the who's got the highest speed, sometimes you want guys to go really hard. Sometimes you don't.
Right.
So it's all how you position and how you use it. And the communication's key. But I think there's always it's probably the best answer that Kirk can give. There might be some stuff you don't, but I think the transparency is huge especially for wearable, because you're asking an athlete to put something on.
Right.
Maybe other data, if contractual negotiations a little different, but when you're asking an athlete to put something on, it's really important that they bought in.
Yeah, I mean, because the dynamic of sport in itself is, you're trying to get me for as cheap as possible, and I'm trying to make you overpay. So I'm not going to give you the competitive advantage of having all the data, you know what I mean? Unless I can, track what your free agency moves are. So,
that's right. And if they ask you to put something on, just ask them to track themselves too, and track the trade.
We're under the belief that if a guy wants to know, we'll usually tell him, but we don't want to force feed things to players.
Yeah, and I think it also depends on timing, when you actually tell them, and the completeness of your data. I mean, look, we can look at data, and somebody could be at a practice, and he could be running slow at a practice. I mean, what's ultimately driving that performance? Well, probably the two most important things that are going to drive performance are basically going to be sleep and nutrition. If somebody was out late last night, didn't get proper nutrition that morning, I probably will predict he's not going to perform well in practice. So, I mean, I think there's a lot of information that goes in, and I think it really depends on what information you're sharing. Is like what point are you trying to get across, and the timing of that.
Right. Thankfully, none of us were out late last night on this panel. We're performing great. So.
Absolutely, everything's good. I think data interpretation are two different things. So the GM team may interpret that data in one way and view that as they're not going to share that. But I think the cat's out of the bag at a societal level. You used to go to a hospital, and the hospital owned that data, which now is asinine. Everyone demands to see their own data. So I think at a societal level, the answer is always yes, you can see your data. What I choose to do with it versus you, that may be secret.
That's the difference.
So the interpretation's the piece, not the data.
We have a question for Kirk here. Basketball is a game where you're constantly making shifts, dribbling through screens. What are ways that wearable technology has helped your coaching staff identify or fix certain tendencies in a player or improve a skill?
It's a really good question. We're still, I know this is not pertinent, we're still learning a lot about that. And I think one of the issues someone raised earlier was the difference between practice and a game. Those are separate, and we view them separately, but we're also trying to combine them. Basketball is tougher than some other sports because it's constant. There's no real stoppage, and it's probably what's made a lot of analyzing basketball harder in general, that there's a lot of constant movement. There's 5 guys, you have to play both ends of the floor all the time, and there's a lot of like minute movements. So there are things we can look at though in terms of load capacities, and I think, I don't know if it's certainly not a fact, but like there's way more pick and rolls now than ever before. Is that a factor towards more knee or ligament injuries? Possibly. So that's something we're trying to look at when we're going through practice or through games, is what type of movements are good or not as good for players? How can we limit those type of things? And can we try to predict based on data if a guy needs a break? And that's the type of stuff we look at. I wish I had like a perfect exact answer, but if I did, then we'd probably never have an injury.
I like this one. What value could come when wearables connect to each other? So imagine a helmet talking to shoulder pads, talking to shoes, and a heart rate monitor. Could these tell a story that are different from a single wearable?
Well, actually, the way our technology works is, from a player tracking standpoint, like we're not in the biometrics business. We work with different companies like Zephyr. We actually can be through Bluetooth communication, can transmit that information in real time with our payload that's going across from our location. So we do work together with other devices, to transmit that information in real time.
Yeah, I think we have 3 companies up here, and we do 3 different things. And we're all wearables, and we're all kind of in the same space, but we do 3 very different things from a data collection standpoint. And you can look at that and say, okay, well then let's do it all. You don't want to have, you don't want to be wearing 18 different devices on your body, but there is an element where certain things will come together. Similar to that, I mean, we integrate heart rate into our product, not through our device, but through other devices. So there's a way to integrate it through the data channel, as Eric was saying, but I think the question then becomes, how much is too much? I mean, if you connect all those dots together, I'm sure it can tell you a picture, but you'll get to that point of, maybe a little bit too much. But it's one interesting dynamic about just even elite wearables, is there are just so many different options, so many different things you can do. And again, that's exciting, and it gives people like Kirk a lot of things to play around with.
A lot of different systems to potentially spend money on as well.
Yeah, exactly. That's what it's really about. They all just want our money.
We've talked a lot about injury prevention, and I just want to ask a little bit more about that, because that seems like a frontier that's sort of, in the analytics world, we've been very performance-oriented and not availability-oriented, if that, I just made up that phrase, but there you go. And so how can, I'd just like to hear a little bit more from everyone on sort of how that maybe pushes us forward as athletes, as organizations, as...
Well, we have clients that part of the way they measure their success is not only examples like the hamstring, but also just days lost. How many days were lost due to injury? Now, those injuries are going to be for many reasons, not things that a wearable can't detect, but measuring days lost and how you can impact that, and you need data and you need that over time, but that's a key metric that a lot of teams look. And if you look at, no matter what sport you're talking about, football, basketball, really any sport, injuries have such a huge impact on how well you are. I mean, if one of the Warriors went down, it would be really hard. I know I'm going to jinx you now, but
yeah, don't say that.
It's a big deal. And so, no matter what sport you're playing, if you can monitor that days lost and just keep guys out there as a first step, and then once they're out there, you're maximizing your performance. But it really doesn't matter if they're not out there on the field, out there on the court, doing whatever they want to do. So there's simple metrics, just like how many days did you lose and why, and start to measure that. And some of that has to do with wearables, some of it doesn't. But I think those are simple metrics that a lot of teams look at to say, okay, let's make sure guys are out there. Let's make sure the guys we're paying a lot of money can be out there doing what they do.
And I think, like, I'll take an example from us last year. We had a guy, an extremely fast guy, come off an ACL injury. So, with the tracking, you can look at the data and know that, okay, he's still cutting 60%, less going from right to left and left to right because of that knee. So that can kind of tell you he's not ready. So from when you analyze that information, it kind of gives you a better picture without having to ask him, how do you feel? Because if he's trying to rush back onto the field, onto the court, or what have you, like I said, you have it in real information. And also, like, I'll give you an example. In 2010, the Cincinnati Bengals signed Antonio Bryant from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, I believe. He was a free agent coming off an ACL injury. And they gave him, I think, $10 million to sign, or guaranteed. Well, he got to camp, and his knee was still in shambles. So he didn't make it out of camp. So he got cut a month later, 2 months into this, or a month into camp, and he walked away with $10 million. The doctor ended up getting fired. But if you have the wearable tech, that you can put him through a quick workout, you can see how, through the data, how bad his knee is, and, you save your club $8 to $10 million.
Sounded like they needed a better medical exam.
It might have been helpful. Yeah.
There's two realities for us in that. And one is, I think what gets talked about a lot, no matter how well you can project how well guys can do or team's going to play, if your players aren't out there, then there's no results. You can't win if you don't have players. And number two, and I think this gets lost a lot, but fans pay a lot of money to come watch players. It's entertainment for them, and that's what supports this whole system. And it really sucks when the player they come to watch can't play. And I think we all owe it, like, to the people supporting our business to make sure that the players are able to play. I mean, that's what we're really all in it for, right? I mean, it's all fun, but it's entertainment. These people are paying for it, and if the guys they came to watch can't play, or the athletes, then what's really the point?
I think the industry is at this inflection point from early adopters to mass market, and why I like injury prevention is the way you get to mass market is you show the dollars of value is greater than the dollars you've been charged. And so this injury prevention is the first and most obvious that everybody here understands. You can put dollars to the value that was bought, and then you're going to get mass adoption. And so that's exciting for any technology in an industry, is when you make that leap and people go, I just have to have it. The only choice now is which one do I get? And that's why I like injury prevention. Everything else, performance and so forth, I think it's a little bit harder for people to grasp as to, was that worth something? Yeah.
All right, and on that note, we're going to end our discussion. Thank you, everybody, so much for coming. Thank you to our panelists.
Get the Jimmy Dean.